Rebecca Hayes tore my cashier's check in half before the teller finished verifying the watermark. "This fake paper is not moving through my branch," she said, letting the pieces fall across the counter glass. My name, my endorsement, and the $100 million deposit order scattered near the currency scanner. Behind her, the wire room stopped because that check controlled the afternoon liquidity transfer for 3 hospitals, 2 payroll accounts, and a bond escrow account only I could release. The vault supervisor looked up from his terminal. Rebecca had not just insulted me. She had touched a system she did not understand. The lobby went quiet in layers. First the counting machine stopped clicking. Then the printer behind the new accounts desk froze mid-page. Then every customer in line turned toward the sound of torn paper. I kept my hand flat on the counter. The glass felt cold beneath my palm. Rebecca smiled like she had restored order. "Ma'am, I am going to ask you to leave before we call security." The word ma'am sounded different from her mouth. Small. Empty. Polished for witnesses. I looked down at the torn check. The ink had not even dried fully on the bank seal. One strip still showed the routing number. Another held the signature from the trust office. I picked up the smallest piece and placed it carefully beside the deposit slip. Rebecca watched my fingers as if calmness offended her more than anger would have. "You walked in here with a canvas purse and asked my teller to process a 9-figure instrument," she said. Her voice rose just enough for the lobby to hear. "Do you know how many fraud attempts we see every week?" A man near the coffee station lowered his cup. A young mother pulled her daughter closer. 2 tellers exchanged a glance and quickly looked away. I could smell burnt coffee, floor polish, and the faint plastic heat from the receipt printers. The bank lights hummed above us. Too bright. Too clean. Too certain. "You could have called Treasury Services," I said. Rebecca leaned closer. Her perfume was sharp. "Expensive. I do not need instructions from you." That was the second mistake. A teller named Marcus glanced at my deposit form again. His face changed. Just a little. His eyes moved from the check fragments to the account number at the top of the slip. He recognized something. He did not speak. Not yet. Rebecca reached for the remaining half of the check, but I moved it back with 2 fingers. Slow. Controlled. "Do not tear another piece," I said. The lobby air tightened. Her smile thinned. "Are you threatening me?" I looked at the wire room door behind her. The red status light above it was blinking now. Pending authorization. Hold queue active. 30 minutes from escalation. Maybe less. "No," I said. "I am giving you a chance to stop." She laughed once. Dry and public. Security. A guard stepped away from the wall. His shoes made soft rubber sounds against the marble. Marcus finally stood from his teller station. His chair rolled back too fast. Rebecca snapped her eyes toward him. "Sit down." He did not. He held the deposit slip in both hands. His face had gone pale under the fluorescent light. "Ms. Hayes," he said carefully, "this account is flagged executive only." Rebecca turned toward him slowly. "What did you say?" Before he could answer, the private elevator behind the frosted glass opened. A man's voice came from inside. Calm. Older. Familiar to everyone but her. "Why is Dr. Carter standing at the counter?" Rebecca's smile faded before she turned around. Rebecca turned toward the private elevator so quickly that her high heels scraped across the marble. The security guard stopped walking. Marcus remained standing beside his station. Nobody in the lobby spoke. The elevator doors slid open fully with a soft mechanical hum. William Foster stepped out first. Gray suit. Silver tie. Calm eyes. The kind of presence that changed a room without raising a voice. Behind him came two senior Treasury officers and a legal advisor carrying a folder. William looked directly at me. Not at the torn check. Not at Rebecca. Me. Dr. Carter, he said warmly. I am sorry you had to wait. The silence that followed felt heavier than the vault downstairs. Rebecca blinked twice. Sir, she said. William glanced at her briefly. Then his eyes moved to the pieces of paper scattered across the counter. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. The Treasury officers noticed immediately. One of them stepped forward and picked up a torn fragment. His face tightened. Is this what I think it is? He asked. Marcus swallowed. Yes, sir. The printer behind the customer service desk suddenly began beeping. Nobody turned toward it. William rested a hand on the counter. Who authorized this? Rebecca forced a nervous smile. Sir, I intercepted a fraudulent instrument before it entered the system. No one answered her. That bothered her more than disagreement would have. The legal advisor quietly collected another torn piece from the floor. He examined the seal. Then he looked toward William. The original authentication mark is intact. Rebecca's smile weakened. That does not mean the check was valid. William finally looked at her fully. The fluorescent lights reflected off the polished counter between them. You tore it up, he asked. Rebecca straightened her posture. I protected the bank. A customer near the entrance slowly lowered his phone. The woman beside him stopped pretending to read a brochure. Every eye remained fixed on the counter. William's jaw tightened slightly. It was the first visible sign of irritation. Protected the bank from what? He asked. Rebecca gestured toward me. A suspicious transaction. The Treasury officer actually looked away for a moment. Not because he was confused. Because he knew exactly how bad this was becoming. I placed the remaining check fragment beside the deposit slip. My fingers moved slowly. Deliberately. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. Somewhere in the back office, a phone rang twice before stopping. William noticed the red wire room status light blinking through the glass. How long has authorization been pending? He asked. One Treasury officer checked his tablet. 27 minutes. William's eyes narrowed. That answer landed harder than anyone expected. Marcus looked down. The security guard quietly stepped back toward the wall. Rebecca crossed her arms. Sir, if this is some misunderstanding, we can simply issue an apology and move on. The Treasury officer almost laughed. He caught himself at the last second. William turned slowly toward her. Move on, he repeated. The legal advisor closed his folder. The transfer deadline is today. Rebecca frowned. Transfer for what? Nobody answered immediately. The delay itself seemed to unsettle her. William looked through the glass toward the wire room again. Then back toward the torn pieces on the counter. Dr. Carter, he said quietly, did anyone explain the consequences? No, I replied. A muscle tightened near his jaw. The Treasury officer checked his screen again. His face suddenly lost color. Sir, he said. The hold queue just escalated. William took the tablet from his hand. He stared at the display for 3 long seconds. Then he looked directly at Rebecca. Do you have any idea whose funds you just froze? The answer arrived before she could speak. Rebecca opened her mouth, but no answer came out. The lobby remained silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling lights. William held the tablet in one hand. His eyes never left her face. Those funds belong to the Carter Foundation, he said. Several customers exchanged confused looks. The name clearly meant something to the executives. It meant nothing to most people in the room. Rebecca forced a small laugh. I am sorry, but I do not see why that changes anything. Marcus lowered his eyes. The Treasury officer closed them briefly. William looked almost disappointed. It changes everything. The words landed softly. They hit harder because he did not raise his voice. Rebecca glanced toward me. Then back toward him. Sir, she presented an unusually large instrument without prior notice. I picked up another piece of the torn check and placed it beside the others. The paper edges lined up neatly. The amount became visible again little by little. $100 million. The number seemed to pull every eye in the building toward the counter. A customer near the entrance slowly sat down. Nobody was thinking about deposits anymore. William set the tablet on the marble surface. Dr. Carter notified Treasury 3 weeks ago. Rebecca's expression changed. What? Twice. The legal advisor opened his folder and removed several printed emails. The pages slid across the counter. Confirmation records, he said. Rebecca stared at them. The color began leaving her face. There must be some mistake. Marcus shook his head before he could stop himself. Rebecca noticed. Marcus, she snapped. He swallowed. The notifications were in the executive queue. A printer started beeping again in the back office. The sound felt strangely loud. Nobody moved to silence it. William folded his hands. Do you know why this transaction matters? Rebecca looked exhausted now. Not humbled. Just confused. No, William pointed toward the blinking red light above the wire room. Because those funds activate 4 major programs tomorrow morning. He paused. Hospital expansion grants. Student housing projects. Emergency medical research funding. The customers listening nearby grew noticeably quieter. One elderly man removed his glasses. A woman near the brochure rack lowered her phone completely. Rebecca looked toward me. For the first time, there was uncertainty in her eyes. You run those programs? She asked. Some of them, I said. The answer seemed to unsettle her more than any accusation could have. William nodded toward me. For 25 years. The Treasury officer checked his tablet again. His expression tightened. Sir. William turned. What now? The escalation notice triggered external review. The room became still again. Rebecca frowned. External review? The legal advisor answered. Every delayed authorization above a certain threshold generates a compliance report. Rebecca stared at him. Because of this? The legal advisor glanced at the torn pieces of paper. Because of that. Nobody needed clarification. The evidence sat right in front of her. A small child near the lobby chairs asked her mother a question. The mother gently shushed him. Even children could sense the tension now. William looked down at the reconstructed fragments. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished counter glass. Dr. Carter, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. Later, I replied. Right now we need a solution. That answer seemed to surprise everyone. Especially Rebecca. She had expected anger. She had expected demands. Instead, the conversation kept returning to the people waiting on the funds. The hospital workers. The students. The research teams. The people none of us could see from this lobby. William nodded once. Agreed. Marcus suddenly looked toward the private elevator. His eyes widened. Another chime echoed through the bank. The elevator doors were opening again. This time, someone far more important was stepping out. The elevator doors opened fully, and every conversation in the lobby died at once. A woman stepped out carrying no briefcase, no security detail, and no visible badge. She wore a simple charcoal suit and carried a tablet under one arm. Yet the reaction around her was immediate. One Treasury officer straightened. The legal advisor stepped aside. Even William Foster moved forward before she reached the counter. Rebecca looked from face to face, trying to understand what she had missed. The woman stopped a few feet from me and smiled. "Dr. Carter," she said. "I heard there was a problem." Her voice was calm. Familiar. Professional. I nodded once. A small one. Several customers exchanged confused glances. Nobody in the lobby understood why the chief executive had greeted me respectfully. They understood even less when he greeted this woman the same way. "Chairwoman Reynolds," William said. "Thank you for coming." Rebecca's eyes widened. She knew that title. Everyone in the bank did. Margaret Reynolds was the chair of the bank's board of directors. She rarely visited branches. She certainly did not appear within minutes of operational disputes. Margaret looked down at the torn pieces on the counter. She did not touch them. She simply studied them. "Is that the original instrument?" she asked. The Treasury officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Rebecca swallowed. The lobby suddenly felt smaller. The lights seemed brighter. The air conditioning hummed above us. Somewhere near the entrance, the automatic doors opened and closed as new customers walked in. Most stopped immediately after seeing the crowd around the counter. Margaret turned toward me. "Were you able to reconstruct the amount?" she asked. "Mostly," I replied. Marcus carefully slid the fragments together. The number became visible again. $100 million. A low murmur moved through the room. Rebecca stared at the pieces as though seeing them for the first time. Margaret finally looked at her. "Did you verify the authorization file?" Rebecca hesitated. "No." "Did you contact Treasury?" "No." "Did you contact executive banking?" "No." Each answer landed harder than the last. Margaret remained calm. That somehow made the exchange worse. Rebecca shifted her weight. The transaction appeared suspicious. Margaret nodded slowly. "Based on what?" Rebecca opened her mouth. Then stopped. The silence stretched. Customers listened openly now. Nobody pretended to check balances anymore. Nobody looked at their phones. William folded his arms. The Treasury officer stared at the floor. Rebecca finally gestured toward me. She walked in alone. Nobody reacted. Rebecca continued. She was carrying the check in a canvas bag. Still nothing. The legal advisor looked away. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Margaret's expression did not change. "Anything else?" she asked. Rebecca hesitated again. That hesitation answered the question better than words could have. A faint tension moved through the crowd. A woman near the brochure rack slowly shook her head. The security guard shifted uncomfortably beside the wall. Margaret rested her tablet on the counter. 25 years ago, she said quietly, this institution nearly collapsed. Rebecca blinked. The statement seemed unrelated. William knew where this was going. His eyes lowered. "A great many people helped save it," Margaret continued. "Investors. Employees. Community leaders." She paused. "One of those people is standing right here." The lobby became silent again. I could hear the distant whir of the currency counter from the back office. Nothing else. Rebecca looked at me. Then at Margaret. Then back at me. The certainty she carried earlier was gone now. Replaced by something far less comfortable. Doubt. Margaret opened her tablet and turned the screen toward William. He read it once. Then a second time. His expression tightened. "The review committee already received the report," he said. The legal advisor looked up sharply. "Already?" William nodded. 5 minutes ago. Rebecca's face lost more color. The consequences were no longer staying inside this branch. They were spreading beyond it. Across departments. Across offices. Across the entire institution. Then Marcus noticed something on the screen and quietly whispered a single sentence. They are requesting the original archive file. Marcus stared at the tablet screen for another second. Then he looked up at William. The archive request came from the Founding Records Division. The words settled over the lobby like dust. Margaret Reynolds slowly picked up her tablet again. That is fast. William nodded. Too fast. Rebecca looked from one face to another. What archive? Nobody answered immediately. The delay made her visibly uncomfortable. The customers noticed it too. Confidence had carried her through the morning. Now every answer seemed to create two new questions. I slid the reconstructed check fragments into a neat stack. The paper edges aligned almost perfectly. One Treasury officer watched me do it. His expression softened slightly. We can still authenticate the instrument, he said. The routing marks survived. Rebecca closed her eyes briefly. The statement hit harder than she wanted to admit. The legal advisor adjusted his glasses. The bigger issue is no longer the instrument. He glanced toward the tablet. It is the history attached to it. The automatic doors opened again. Two men in business suits entered carrying sealed document cases. Neither approached the teller line. Both walked directly toward Margaret. The customers immediately noticed. This was no longer an ordinary branch operation. The smell of coffee had faded. All I could smell now was paper, toner, and the cold air flowing from the ceiling vents. Margaret accepted a small access card from one of the men. They located the file, she asked. Yes, ma'am. The man hesitated. And several related records. William exhaled slowly. How many? More than expected. Rebecca folded her arms. Can someone please explain what is happening? No one sounded angry when they ignored her. Somehow that felt worse. Marcus shifted behind the counter. He remembered something. I could see it in his face. His eyes moved from me to the archive team and back again. Wait, he said quietly. Everyone looked at him. I saw that name during orientation. The room became still. Marcus swallowed. Years ago. William nodded. Go on. Marcus pointed toward me. The training program mentioned a private investor who guaranteed the emergency stabilization package after the banking crisis. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. You remember that? Marcus nodded. The instructor said the institution would not exist in its current form without that guarantee. Several customers exchanged confused looks. One man lowered the newspaper he had been pretending to read for 20 minutes. Rebecca stared at Marcus. Then at me. Then at William. That investor was her, she asked. Nobody corrected her. Nobody laughed. Nobody needed to. The answer sat in the silence itself. Rebecca took a slow step backward. Her heel clicked softly against the marble. The sound echoed through the lobby. Margaret accepted a thin folder from the archive team. The cover showed signs of age. The edges were worn. The label had faded. She opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, signatures, and correspondence stretching back decades. William leaned closer. The Treasury officers did the same. I remained where I was. Margaret turned one page. Then another. The atmosphere shifted. Something in those documents mattered more than money. More than compliance reviews. More than operational failures. William suddenly stopped turning pages. His eyes locked onto a single photograph. I forgot this existed, he said quietly. Margaret looked down at the image. Her expression changed immediately. Not shock. Recognition. The kind that comes from remembering a debt that was never fully repaid. Rebecca could not see the photograph from where she stood. The uncertainty was beginning to wear on her. "What is it?" she asked. William looked up slowly. His voice was softer than before. "The day everything changed." Then he turned the photograph toward the lobby. Every person in the lobby leaned forward when William turned the photograph around. The image was old. The colors had faded. The edges were worn from years inside a file cabinet. Yet the faces were clear. A much younger version of William stood beside a temporary folding table. Several bank employees surrounded him. In the center of the photograph stood a younger version of me holding a stack of documents. Behind us, a handwritten sign read "Emergency Stabilization Meeting." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Even the automatic doors seemed quieter. Rebecca stared at the photograph. Then she looked at me again. Then back at the photograph. "That is her?" she asked. Margaret nodded once. 25 years ago. William held the image carefully. The week before this photograph was taken, we were preparing contingency plans. A customer near the entrance frowned. "For what?" William glanced toward him. "Closure." The answer changed the room. Several people exchanged surprised looks. Marcus stopped moving entirely. The Treasury officer folded his arms. William continued. "We were losing capital. Investors were leaving. Confidence was collapsing." He pointed toward the photograph. Then Dr. Carter arrived. Rebecca swallowed. The confidence that once filled her posture was gone now. Replaced by disbelief. Margaret opened the archive folder again. She removed another document. The paper crackled softly. "This is the original guarantee agreement." She laid it carefully on the counter. The signatures were still visible. The dates too. Customers stretched slightly to see. Rebecca looked down at the document. Her eyes stopped on my name. "You guaranteed the rescue package?" she asked quietly. "Part of it," I said. William shook his head. "The critical part." Silence followed. The printer in the back office finally stopped beeping. The sudden quiet made the lobby feel larger. Margaret turned another page. This one contained newspaper clippings. Headlines. Financial reports. Public statements. "Most people never knew," she said. That was intentional. I rested my hand lightly on the counter. The glass remained cold. "The attention belonged on the institution," I said. "Not me." A woman waiting near the customer service desk slowly nodded to herself. Rebecca looked away. The answer seemed to trouble her more than the money ever had. One of the archive specialists stepped forward. "There is another file." Margaret looked up. "Another one?" "Yes, ma'am." He handed her a sealed envelope. The paper looked older than everything else in the folder. William immediately recognized it. "I have not seen that in years." Margaret studied the handwriting on the front. Her expression softened. "Neither have I." Rebecca watched closely. She was searching for certainty. Something solid. Instead, every answer seemed to reveal another layer. Margaret carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single letter. The paper had yellowed with age. She unfolded it slowly. The lobby became silent again. Even the customers who had arrived only minutes earlier stood motionless. Margaret read the first lines privately. Then she stopped. Her eyes lifted toward me. "You wrote this?" she asked. I nodded. "A long time ago." William smiled faintly. "Read it." Margaret looked down at the page again. Her voice carried clearly across the lobby. A bank is more than money. It is trust made visible. Several people lowered their eyes. Rebecca did too. Margaret continued reading. When institutions forget people, numbers eventually follow. The word settled over the room. Not like a lecture. Like a memory returning. William glanced toward the reconstructed check fragments. Then toward the red wire room status light. She wrote that before we survived the crisis, he said quietly. The Treasury officer checked his tablet again. Suddenly his expression changed. Sir. William turned immediately. What is it? The officer looked from the screen to me. Then back to William. The External Review Committee just found something in the old records. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The officer took a slow breath. It changes the entire story. The Treasury officer held the tablet a little tighter. Every person in the lobby watched him. The air felt different now. Less like a bank. More like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. William took a step closer. Tell us. The officer glanced at the screen again. The review committee located. The original stabilization records. Margaret folded her hands. We already knew those existed. Not these records. His voice was careful. These were sealed. Rebecca stood motionless beside the counter. Her eyes moved from face to face. She looked like someone trying to solve a puzzle while the pieces kept changing shape. William frowned. Sealed by whom? The officer swallowed. By the board. A low murmur spread through the lobby. Margaret's expression tightened immediately. That should not be possible. The legal advisor stepped forward. What exactly did they find? The officer turned the tablet around. Several executives leaned closer. I remained where I was. The cold glass counter pressed gently against my fingertips. Somewhere near the entrance, a customer quietly pulled out a chair and sat down. Nobody was leaving now. The officer pointed toward a scanned document. The stabilization package was never supposed to be temporary. William stared at the screen. What? According to the original agreement, Dr. Carter was offered something else. Margaret looked up sharply. No, the officer nodded. Yes. Silence filled the room. Even the ceiling vents seemed quieter. William looked toward me. You never told us. No, I said. Rebecca frowned. Told you what? The answer did not come immediately. Margaret took the tablet from the officer and read through several pages herself. The color slowly drained from her face. That reaction caught everyone's attention. Margaret Reynolds was not easily surprised. Yet now she looked genuinely unsettled. This changes everything, she said softly. Rebecca stared at her. Can someone please explain? William looked down at the photograph again. Then at me. Then back at the records. 25 years ago, he said, the board offered Dr. Carter an executive ownership position. Several customers gasped. Marcus nearly dropped the deposit slip. Rebecca blinked. Once. Twice. Ownership? William nodded. Permanent ownership. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Difficult. Real. Rebecca looked at me as though she had never seen me before. You owned part of the bank, she asked. I never accepted it, I replied. Nobody spoke after that. The answer seemed impossible to process. Margaret closed the tablet. The records show the offer remained active for 6 months. The legal advisor shook his head slowly. Why decline? I looked toward the wire room. The red light still blinked behind the glass. Waiting. Because the communities needed the money more than I needed the title. A woman near the entrance lowered her eyes. Marcus looked away. William smiled sadly. That sounds exactly like you. Rebecca leaned against the counter slightly. Not from weakness. From disbelief. You could have owned part of this institution, she asked. A small part, I said. Enough. The silence returned. This time it felt different. Not tense. Reflective. Margaret reopened the archive folder. There is another issue. William immediately noticed her tone. What issue? She removed one final document. Unlike the others, it looked recent. Very recent. The paper was bright white. The ink was fresh. The date sat at the top corner. Today's date. William stared at it. Why is that in the archive file? Margaret looked directly at me. Because someone submitted it this morning. Rebecca's eyes widened. The Treasury officer checked the document and froze. Marcus did the same. Nobody said a word for several seconds. Then William looked up from the page and asked the question everyone was thinking. Dr. Carter, why were you planning to walk away today? William's question lingered in the air. Nobody moved. Nobody even looked away. The lobby had become so quiet that I could hear the faint ticking of a wall clock near the mortgage offices. Rebecca stared at me. Margaret held the document carefully. Marcus remained frozen behind the counter. Every face carried the same question now. Why was I leaving? I rested my hand on the stack of reconstructed check fragments. The paper felt rough along the torn edges. Because my work here was finished, I said. The answer surprised them. William frowned. Finished? I nodded. The foundation completed its transition plan 6 months ago. Margaret lowered her eyes to the document. The transfer request. Yes. The Treasury officer looked at the screen again. $100 million. The final commitment, I said. The customers listening nearby exchanged confused glances. They still saw money. They did not yet see what the money represented. William understood immediately. His shoulders dropped slightly. You were closing the partnership. Not ending it, I said. Passing it on. The legal advisor adjusted his glasses. To whom? I looked toward the windows. Afternoon sunlight reflected across the polished floor. To the next generation. Margaret smiled faintly. Scholarships. I nodded. Research grants. Housing initiatives. Small business programs. The word settled gently through the room. Rebecca looked down at the counter. You were funding all of that, she asked quietly. Along with many others. Her eyes remained fixed on the torn pieces. She seemed unable to stop looking at them. William took a slow breath. You should have told us. A small smile crossed my face. The paperwork did. That answer earned the first faint laugh of the day. Not from customers. From Margaret. The tension eased for a moment. Then the Treasury officer cleared his throat. There is another detail. The room immediately became attentive again. William turned toward him. What now? The officer hesitated. The review committee found a recommendation attached to today's transfer. Margaret looked surprised. A recommendation? He nodded. Signed this morning. The legal advisor extended his hand. Let me see it. The tablet changed hands. Several executives leaned closer. Rebecca watched from the edge of the group. She no longer looked like the person who had stood behind this counter an hour earlier. Her certainty was gone. The legal advisor read silently for several seconds. Then he looked up. This cannot be right. William took the tablet. His eyes scanned the document. The expression on his face changed immediately. "You recommended this branch?" he asked. I nodded once. Rebecca blinked. "What?" William turned the screen toward Margaret. "The final transfer includes a recommendation that the Foundation's next community investment center be built here." The silence that followed felt almost unreal. Customers exchanged astonished looks. Marcus stared openly now. Even the security guard looked shocked. Rebecca seemed unable to process the information. "Here?" she asked. "This branch?" "Yes," I said. "This neighborhood needs it." Margaret shook her head slowly. "After today?" I looked around the lobby. The tellers. The customers. The families waiting in line. The elderly man reading financial brochures. The young mother holding her daughter's hand. Especially after today. Nobody responded. Not because they disagreed. Because they did not know how to answer kindness they had not expected. Rebecca lowered her eyes. The fluorescent lights reflected softly across the counter glass. "I do not understand," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why would you still choose this place?" I looked at the torn check fragments one more time. Then at the people standing around them. Because institutions matter less than the people inside them. The room fell silent again. Then Margaret noticed a final page attached to the transfer file, and her expression suddenly changed. Margaret kept staring at the final page. The warmth that had briefly returned to her face disappeared. William noticed immediately. "What is it?" he asked. She did not answer right away. Her eyes moved across the document a second time. Then a third. The silence pulled everyone closer. Even the customers near the entrance leaned forward. Rebecca watched Margaret carefully. "What does it say?" Margaret finally looked up. "This was added less than an hour ago." The Treasury officer frowned. "By whom?" Margaret turned the tablet toward William. "Read the signature." William took the device. His expression changed almost instantly. Not shock. Recognition. "I know this name," he said quietly. The legal advisor stepped closer. "Who is it?" William looked toward me. "Someone from the old days." The lobby grew still again. I already knew the name before he spoke it. Some memories never really leave. "Daniel Mercer," William said. Marcus frowned. The customers looked confused. Rebecca looked lost. The name meant nothing to them. It meant something to everyone holding the archive records. Margaret folded her arms. "The committee contacted him this morning." William nodded slowly. "After all these years." The legal advisor looked between them. "Who exactly is Daniel Mercer?" William glanced at the old photograph resting on the counter. "The man who originally structured the stabilization package." Several people exchanged looks. The Treasury officer checked another file. "He retired 20 years ago." "Earlier than that," I said. William nodded. "Much earlier." Rebecca finally spoke. "What does he have to do with today's transfer?" Margaret tapped the screen gently. "He attached a statement." The room became quiet once more. The automatic doors opened behind us. Nobody even turned around. Margaret began reading aloud. "If this transfer is being executed by Dr. Angela Carter, the board should review the original recommendation that was never adopted." William closed his eyes briefly. "I remember that recommendation." The legal advisor looked surprised. "You do?" "Yes." William exhaled slowly. "The board ignored it." Rebecca stared at him. "Ignored what?" Margaret scrolled further down the page. Her voice softened. "The proposal to establish a permanent community oversight council." Marcus looked up immediately. Oversight? Margaret nodded. Independent review. Community representation. Scholarship accountability. The Treasury officer read over her shoulder. He wanted local voices involved in every major funding decision. William smiled sadly. He was ahead of his time. A customer near the waiting area lowered his newspaper completely. And they rejected it? William nodded. Unanimously. The words lingered in the air. Margaret looked toward me. Except one person. Rebecca followed her gaze. Slowly. You voted for it. I nodded once. The fluorescent lights reflected across the polished floor. Somewhere in the back office a drawer closed. The sound seemed unusually loud. William looked down at the recommendation again. Daniel wrote a note. Margaret handed him the tablet. He read silently for several seconds. Then his expression changed. This time everyone noticed. What? Asked the legal advisor. William swallowed. He says the Oversight Council should finally be created. Marcus smiled faintly. That sounds reasonable. William nodded. It does. Then he looked directly at Rebecca. Because he specifically recommended one person to lead it. Rebecca froze. Margaret already knew what the next line said. So did I. The Treasury officer leaned closer to the screen. The customers waited. Nobody spoke. William finally lowered the tablet and read the recommendation aloud. Chairperson, Rebecca Hayes, contingent upon her response to today's events. Then Rebecca looked at the torn pieces again. Rebecca did not look up immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the torn pieces spread across the counter. The recommendation seemed impossible to reconcile with the morning she had just lived through. The lobby stayed silent. No one rushed to fill it. No one offered an explanation. The weight of the moment belonged to her. William set the tablet down carefully. Daniel Mercer rarely attached personal recommendations, he said. Rebecca finally lifted her head. Then why would he recommend me? Her voice sounded different now. Smaller. Honest. Margaret folded her hands. Read the next paragraph. William scrolled lower. His eyes moved slowly across the screen. Then he read aloud. Leadership is not measured by the mistakes a person avoids. It is measured by what they do after the mistake becomes undeniable. The words settled over the room. Marcus lowered his gaze. The security guard shifted his weight quietly near the wall. Several customers exchanged thoughtful looks. Rebecca stared at the floor. The polished marble reflected the overhead lights around her shoes. I do not deserve that recommendation, she said. Nobody answered immediately. The silence felt respectful rather than uncomfortable. William looked toward me. What do you think? Every eye turned in my direction. I looked at the fragments of the check. Then at Rebecca. She looked exhausted now. Not physically. Spiritually. The certainty she had carried all morning was gone. What remained was something far more difficult. Self-awareness. I think recommendations are about potential, I said. Rebecca blinked. She had expected criticism. Perhaps even condemnation. The answer seemed to confuse her. Margaret nodded slowly. Daniel believed that too. William continued reading. The ideal chairperson is not someone who has never failed another person. It is someone who learns to see people more clearly afterward. A customer near the waiting area quietly folded his newspaper. Another customer slowly nodded. The words reached beyond the people standing at the counter. They touched everyone listening. Rebecca took a slow breath. I tore up her check. No one corrected her. I ignored procedure. Her voice wavered slightly. I made assumptions. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Somewhere in the back office, a copier started running. Life continued around us. Yet the moment felt suspended. Margaret looked directly at Rebecca. And now? Rebecca swallowed. Her eyes moved toward me. For the first time since I entered the branch, there was no defensiveness in them. No suspicion. No need to prove anything. Now I understand what I failed to see. The answer came quietly. It carried farther than shouting ever could. William smiled faintly. The legal advisor relaxed his posture. Marcus looked relieved. Rebecca turned fully toward me. Dr. Carter, she said. The title sounded different from the way she had spoken earlier. Respect had replaced judgment. I cannot undo what happened. I nodded once. No, she looked down at the torn paper. But I can acknowledge it. The room remained silent. She drew a careful breath. I saw your appearance before I saw your credentials. Another pause. Then I saw the amount before I saw the purpose. Nobody interrupted. Then I saw a transaction before I saw a person. The words hung in the air. Honest. Difficult. Real. Margaret lowered her eyes briefly. William looked toward the reconstructed check. The Treasury officer quietly closed his tablet. Rebecca looked at me again. I am sorry. No speeches followed. No dramatic reactions. The apology stood on its own. Then Marcus noticed a new message appear on the Treasury screen. Marcus stared at the Treasury screen for several seconds before speaking. His expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief. The authorization cleared, he said quietly. The word seemed to release the tension that had been holding the room together all afternoon. William looked up immediately. All of it? Marcus nodded. Every transfer. Every program. A soft breath moved through the lobby. Not applause. Relief. The red status light above the wire room finally changed. The blinking stopped. A steady green glow replaced it. Several employees noticed at once. One Treasury officer smiled for the first time that day. Rebecca looked toward the light. Then toward the torn pieces still resting on the counter. The contrast seemed impossible to ignore. The transaction she had stopped was now moving forward anyway. The hospitals would receive their funding. The housing projects would continue. The scholarships would be issued. Life beyond these walls had already started moving again. William glanced at the screen Marcus was holding. What triggered the approval? Marcus scrolled through the report. His eyes widened. It came from the review committee. Margaret folded her arms. That was fast. Marcus nodded. They added a note. William extended his hand. Let me see it. The tablet changed hands. The lobby grew quiet once more. William read silently. Then he smiled. A genuine smile this time. What does it say? Asked the legal advisor. William looked up. It says the institution should remember why it survived. Nobody spoke for a moment. The sentence felt larger than a procedural comment. Margaret nodded slowly. That sounds like Daniel. William continued reading. The purpose of trust is not to protect money. It is to protect people. A woman near the waiting area lowered her eyes. An older customer removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. The words seemed to reach everyone differently. Rebecca remained still. The apology she had offered moments earlier still hung in the air. It had not been dismissed. It had not been celebrated. It had simply been accepted. I gathered the reconstructed pieces of the check together and slid them into a small envelope. The paper no longer looked damaged. Just changed. William noticed. Treasury can issue a replacement immediately. I smiled faintly. That will not be necessary. Marcus looked surprised. It will not. No, I tapped the envelope lightly. Sometimes the original tells the story better. Rebecca looked down. She understood exactly what I meant. Margaret closed the archive folder and handed it to one of the specialists. These records belong in preservation. The specialist nodded. Yes, ma'am. William looked around the lobby. The crowd that had gathered no longer seemed like strangers. Employees stood beside customers. Executives stood beside tellers. For a brief moment, titles mattered less than people. The fluorescent lights still hummed overhead. The marble floor still reflected the afternoon sun. Yet the room felt different. Rebecca stepped away from the counter and approached Marcus. After this is over, she said quietly, I would like copies of the community outreach reports. Marcus looked surprised. All of them? Every one. Margaret noticed the exchange. So did William. Neither said anything. Some changes announced themselves loudly. Others began with a simple request. Then a message appeared on William's phone, and his expression shifted again. William looked at the phone screen for several seconds before speaking. The change in his expression was subtle. Yet everyone noticed it. Margaret noticed first. Then Marcus. Then Rebecca. The lobby had become unusually good at reading silence. What happened? Margaret asked. William looked up. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The board voted. The legal advisor straightened immediately. Already? William nodded. 5 minutes ago. The afternoon sunlight had shifted across the marble floor. Long reflections stretched between the teller stations. Customers remained in place even though many had finished their business long ago. Nobody seemed eager to leave before the story reached its end. William placed the phone on the counter. The recommendation passed unanimously. Marcus blinked. The Oversight Council. Yes. William looked toward Rebecca. Effective immediately. Rebecca stood motionless. The word seemed almost impossible for her to process. Only hours earlier she had been certain she was protecting the institution. Then the institution revealed a history she had never known. Now it was asking her to help guide its future. Margaret folded her arms. Daniel Mercer would have enjoyed this moment. William laughed softly. Very much. The Treasury officer glanced toward the windows. That means the first meeting will happen next month. 3 weeks, corrected Margaret. The communities have waited long enough. Several customers quietly nodded. One older woman smiled. Another customer lowered his coffee cup and looked toward Rebecca. Nobody was celebrating her. Nobody was condemning her. They were simply watching to see what she would do next. Rebecca noticed. I am not sure I am the right person, she admitted. Her honesty filled the room more effectively than confidence ever had. Margaret stepped closer. That is exactly why you might be. The legal advisor smiled faintly. People who believe they already have every answer rarely ask the right questions. Rebecca looked down at the outreach reports Marcus had placed on the counter earlier. Several thick binders. Years of community work. Years she had barely noticed. Her fingertips touched the top folder. Slowly. Carefully. As though she finally understood its weight. I watched her for a moment. Then I looked toward the entrance. Outside, afternoon traffic moved steadily through the city. Parents were picking up children. Hospital workers were changing shifts. Students were attending classes supported by programs most would never think about. The world continued. It always did. The purpose of the funding had never been recognition. It had always been people. William followed my gaze. The transfers are already moving, he said. The hospitals confirmed receipt. Marcus checked his screen. Student housing too. The Treasury officer smiled. Research funding cleared 15 minutes ago. The news spread quietly through the lobby. Not with cheers. With relief. Margaret closed the archive folder one final time. Then the work continues. The statement felt larger than the room around us. Larger than the bank. Larger than any one person standing there. Rebecca looked at me. Thank you for staying. I smiled gently. Thank the people who still need the work. She nodded. This time she understood. The automatic doors opened. Fresh afternoon air drifted briefly into the lobby. Customers began gathering their belongings. Employees returned slowly to their stations. Life resumed. Yet something had changed. Not in the systems. Not in the records. In the people. Then Margaret noticed a handwritten note tucked inside the final archive folder. Margaret carefully pulled the handwritten note from the archive folder. The paper was small. Folded twice. Yellowed at the edges. The handwriting belonged to Daniel Mercer. William recognized it immediately. I have not seen that in years, he said quietly. The lobby had begun returning to normal, yet everyone nearby paused once more. Customers lingered by the entrance. Employees remained close to their stations. Nobody seemed eager to miss the final page of a story that had started with torn paper and assumptions. Margaret unfolded the note. The paper crackled softly beneath her fingers. Sunlight stretched across the marble floor. The afternoon had grown warmer. The green authorization light still glowed steadily beyond the glass. Read it, William said. Margaret nodded and lowered her eyes to the page. To whoever inherits responsibility for this institution, she began. The room fell silent again. Remember that trust is easiest to lose when people become invisible. Marcus looked down. Rebecca listened without moving. Margaret continued. The numbers will always matter. The reports will always matter. But the person standing in front of you matters first. Several customers exchanged quiet glances. The words felt strangely personal now. As though they had been written for this exact day. Margaret turned the page over. There was one final paragraph. Her voice softened. If you ever forget this lesson, look beyond titles, clothing, accounts, and appearances. Human worth rarely arrives wearing a name tag. The note ended there. No signature was necessary. Everyone knew who had written it. Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that settles when people recognize a truth they needed to hear. William looked toward the counter where the envelope containing the reconstructed check now rested. Daniel always knew how to say more with less. Margaret smiled faintly. That is why people remembered him. Rebecca stood quietly for several seconds. Then she picked up the community outreach binder Marcus had placed on the counter earlier. She held it differently this time. Not like paperwork. Like responsibility. Marcus noticed. So did William. No one commented. Some moments did not require words. I looked around the lobby one final time. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The same counters lined the room. The same doors opened and closed as customers came and went. Nothing physical had changed. Yet everything felt different. The institution remained. The systems remained. The people remained. But perspective had shifted. Sometimes that mattered more. William extended his hand toward me. I shook it. Margaret followed. Then Marcus. Even the security guard offered a quiet nod before returning to his post. Rebecca stepped forward last. Her eyes met mine. There was no defensiveness left in them. Only understanding. I will remember, she said. I believed her. Outside, traffic moved steadily through the city. Somewhere a student would receive housing assistance. Somewhere a researcher would continue important work. Somewhere a family would benefit from a program they would never trace back to this lobby. That was enough. I picked up the envelope and turned toward the entrance. Warm sunlight touched the glass doors. Behind me, employees returned to their work. Customers resumed their conversations. Life moved forward. Before the doors closed, I heard Marcus reading the note one more time to a new teller who had just arrived. Then the afternoon carried the words onward.